Our third keynote is Bernd Langeheine, Director of the European Commission DG Information Society, and Bernd will give us the perspective from Brussels on these issues. Bernd, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting conference and giving me the opportunity to say a few words about the digital agenda for Europe from a European Commission perspective. The digital agenda is a blueprint for action by all stakeholders. And with that, of course, we want to overcome the crisis and prepare Europe for the 21st century. And one of the key actions of the digital agenda, and this was already mentioned by Gabor Matrai, is the creation of high-speed internet connections, the so-called fourth pillar, broadband rollout. I have the doubtful pleasure of being in charge of that pillar in the European Commission. These are measurable targets, they were already mentioned, and I hope that these targets will actually be reached. I think the targets may look very ambitious today, but I'm not sure whether they will still be regarded as ambitious in 2020. I think we all know that technological developments often surpass the imagination of policymakers and regulators. So I'm confident that the targets can be reached, but I think it requires a lot of work, and what we have done is we have drafted a work plan, not only for the European Commission, but also for the Member States, and I have mentioned here some of the actions that we want to do from the European Commission and what we expect the Member States to do on their part, and some of these measures were already mentioned. I will go into the broadband package in a bit more detail in a minute, but just to say that on the Member State side, of course, we would like to see ambitious national broadband plans, and I was very encouraged by the words of the Minister announcing a broadband concept for Friday, and I am hopeful that this concept will really help to move the developments in Hungary forward and will somehow fit together with the ideas that we have in Brussels for Europe as a whole. As regards the broadband package, there were a number of actions we adopted last September. One was the recommendation on next generation access network. This is a document that is designed to create some regulatory certainty and to strike an appropriate balance between the need to encourage investment on the one hand and to have sufficient competition on the other hand. The second action was the proposal for a European radio spectrum policy program. My colleague Piers O'Donoghue will say something about it this afternoon, and I'm sure it will still be discussed in other presentations as well this afternoon. And then there's the broadband communication, which is interesting in that it is a kind of a blueprint for action on the part of the Member States and also on the part of the Commission. We promise in that, in particular, to explore further possibilities for the funding of broadband rollout, and we ask the Member States to ensure that in their actions, in their public measures, they facilitate investment into broadband as much as possible, and they, in particular, try to reduce the rollout cost for broadband. Let me take a quick look at the NGA recommendation. This was a document that was discussed for a long time. There were several versions of this. The pendulum was swinging back and forth, but I think that in the end we found a document that strikes an excellent balance between the various interests of the stakeholders involved. And I would just like to mention here the possibilities for national regulators to take action in line with the NGA recommendation. There are, in particular, certain ideas in this document as to how NRAs could encourage and incentivize investment, and an important one is the possibility to grant a risk premium when setting regulated access prices. There is already, I think, some work going on in the member states. I heard the other day that in Germany there was already work underway, and already figures were being given as regards possible figures for the weighted average cost of capital, and all this, of course, will then have to be factored into access prices and hopefully will serve to incentivize investment in these new networks. There's also the possibility for regulators not to impose remedies in the case of co-investment if certain conditions are met. These are fairly strict conditions, but they basically amount to a guarantee for effective infrastructure-based competition that will be created through this co-investment. Then there's a mention of additional flexibility in pricing with regard to long-term contracts and with regard to contracts covering large volumes. So I think this will contribute to creating regulatory certainty and will help to stimulate investment. We believe that broadband should be market-driven first and foremost and should be brought about by private investment. This sometimes seems to be difficult. The business case, we are told, is sometimes difficult to make, in particular in less densely populated areas. We also face maybe problems on the demand side. How much are consumers really willing to pay more for faster broadband connections? These are problems that will need a lot of attention and will eventually need to be solved. For less densely populated area, I think a pure market-driven approach will often not be sufficient. We need other forms of financing or co-financing. And I've mentioned here some of the financial instruments that are available and about which we are talking at the moment. The European Investment Bank already lends in the range of 2 billion euros per year to broadband projects, but these are mainly larger investments, typically in the range of above 100 million euros, which may be too high for certain smaller projects. So smaller investors or PPPs often have problems getting access to appropriate financing. We are already sitting down with the investment bank and we will try to set out concrete proposals for financing instruments to complement the existing resources for the financing of broadband infrastructure. And such instruments could be of a debt, guarantee or equity type, or also of a combination of all these. One possibility, for example, would be the use of so-called project bonds, and we are looking for suitable projects, and we think that member states should make proposals now for high-speed broadband projects which involve co-investment and which could benefit from these project bonds. So what we will still do this year is we will publish guidance on broadband investment models for national authorities, and we will also give guidance on PPPs and on other financial instruments in order to improve the financial viability of projects in underserved areas.